what's going on, Peter? I think there's, well, here, you tell me, what say you? And it's just kind of like a wide range of a question, but why do you think we're going to have, what are you going to call it, a recession or a collapse, or it's going to go the other way? Or what does your crystal ball tell you, and why?
Well, that's actually, all I'm saying is that if we continue to follow the same policies we are following now, which are the same policies that we followed before the financial crisis, we will have another financial crisis in time. It's inevitable.
And what are those policies? Help the audience. What are those policies?
The policies were to, and are now to, increase the number of people who can buy homes by reducing underwriting standards on mortgages. So that, for example, by 2008, of the 55 million mortgages in the United States, 31 million were subprime or otherwise very weak mortgages, like no down payment.
Right. Okay.
And of those, 76% were on the books of government agencies. So that tells you where the demand came from and why government policies would be responsible for something like another financial crisis.
But we stopped Mefford, the gentleman that's working here with me today, Steve Lynn. He is a mortgage person, but you could speak to it. I mean,
I'm a mortgage
aren't
broker.
Policies a lot tougher now, though?
Oh, my God. There's no subprime. I mean, if you can't show the ability to repay a mortgage, you cannot close on a loan today. So
that doesn't mean that it's not subprime. In fact, that standard, the ability to repay, has no underwriting standards associated with it. You could have a 520 FICO score.
There's nobody writing
and get
520s.
a mortgage. What?
There's nobody writing 520 mortgages.
No, Steve, maybe you're not writing them.
No, there aren't. I'm just saying what the standards are. People are not doing it now, but the government is actually trying to reduce underwriting standards. You know.
Okay, now you're talking. Okay, so you're saying. Go ahead.
The organization that regulates Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are now under the control of the government, has recently put out a statement that it wants Fannie and Freddie to reduce the down payments that they will accept.
What is it?
3%. First of all, it was about 5%. That's about the average.
Okay.
That's far too low to begin with.
Correct.
And now they want to reduce the down payment to 3%. So those are the kinds of policies that preceded the financial crisis, and that's why we had all those terrible loans in the financial system in 2008, and why, when the cycle turned and the bubble deflated, so many mortgages failed and so many financial institutions got into trouble.
You don't need 20% down live-in for a house?
No, well, let me respond. I mean, there are 3% down programs, at 3.5% for FHA, but you still have to be credit worthy. You need a minimum credit score. Debt to income ratios have to be within line. They go through you very thoroughly. The standards, I think the biggest trouble we got in before with the no income verification loans. That's really where it got crazy.
Well, those things got a lot of attention, but that was not the main cause. The main cause was the fact that there were so many subprime loans which are below 660 FICO score.
Agreed.
And yes, the banks want to put those requirements in when they make loans, and especially if they're going to portfolio loans, they want, that is, keep those loans for themselves. They do that, but on the other hand, they can sell these loans to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac without any adequate credit score and with a very low down payment of, say, 3%. This ability to repay question is whether you can repay the mortgage on the date that the mortgage is agreed to, is contracted. And as we know, many people have problems like divorce and loss of jobs and things, and illness and so forth. And if they don't have a good credit score, it shows that over time they have never really been able to meet their obligations as those obligations came due. So it's important to have very good underwriting standards. And if we don't have those, we are going to have the same kind of collapse in the future, because mortgages are an enormous asset in the United States, about $11 trillion. So we have to protect that market.
What would you do to change it? I would. Go ahead.
Well, I would take the government out. The reason we have this problem is that the government has been controlling the housing finance system now for 50 or 60 years. And it is the desire of the government always to reduce underwriting standards. And they make it possible because they can do things like guarantee mortgages and so forth. But they like to do that because it gooses housing sales, and housing sales are good for the economy. But if you look at it over the long term, the effect is that we get ourselves into trouble every 10 or 15 years because the underwriting standards are so poor.
Peter J. Wallison is the Arthur F. Burns Chair in Financial Policy Studies. Check this out, guys. From June 1981 to January 85, he was General Counsel of the U.S. Treasury, and he was also White House counsel to President Ronald Reagan. He's written a book, Hidden in Plain Sight, What Really Caused the World's Worst Financial Crisis and Why It Could Happen Again.
Yeah, Peter, if you say if the policies aren't changed or we keep going down this path, so what do you think? Another a year or 2 or 3 or?
Oh, no, it's going to take much longer than that.
Much
Not
longer,
a year or 2 or 3. Sure. Look, the one that we had, the financial crisis that we had in 2008, began, or the policies that caused it began in 1992, so it was 16 years from the time those policies began with the adoption in 1992 of something called the Affordable Housing Goals.
Right.
When those were imposed on Fannie and Freddie in 1992, they were only accepting prime mortgages. And after that, they started accepting all kinds of terrible mortgages, subprime and what are called Alt-A, which means very low quality, no down payments and things like that, because they had to meet a government quota. The government quota was intended to increase the credit availability for many people, mostly people below the median income in the places where they lived. Now, if the government wants to do that, as a matter of policy, they can do it, but we ought to recognize that the whole financial system is in jeopardy when we allow that to happen over a period of time.
You know what gets me? We don't seem to learn from history.
Yes.
Okay, we don't seem to, there's a growing concern about the lack of, I think I'm speaking for myself, a lot of millions of Americans, about how secure we feel, today with going with ISIS and the border and everything else. I mean, did we forget about 9/11? You know what I mean? Like, do we not learn from history that let's be safer, let's be smarter? We just seem to wallow back in the same snoozing pattern. Really, seriously, and be politically correct and put a Band-Aid on it and tolerate stuff instead of saying, "Oh my God, these people want to kill us. We have to eradicate this. Look what happened in 9/11. We can get bombed on our own soil." Yada. It doesn't. And so what you're saying is almost the same thing. It's like we got killed in 2007, at the end of 2007, whatever, 2000, and it started coming back a little bit. Maybe we lull ourselves right back in, 2025 to 2028, and it's beyond ridiculous. I don't know why. And let's face it, we all know this was really bad. This was as close to a depression as we could possibly be. So let me ask. I don't know, it sounds like a stupid question. Why? Why? You served. You were Reagan. Why? Why don't they learn from history and change things around?
Well, unfortunately.
In your opinion,
actually, it's a very complicated problem because, for example, what we have been told since 2008, mostly in the media, is that, and the government has been saying the same thing, and that is the cause of the crisis was Wall Street,
right,
and the big banks.
Right.
They did it, and so the American people believe that Wall Street did it and the big banks did it. They're not going to watch what the government is doing. And yet it was the government that created the policies that produced the financial crisis. So one of the problems we have is that we have to make sure people know the truth about what actually happened. And the reason I published this book is so people would take a look at the data that I have in that book and realize that they have not actually been told why we had a financial crisis.
If I may chime in, I think the reason behind all this is greed. Greed drives it. Greed, the government wants to give it. The Wall Street was greedy. People were greedy. The banks were greedy. Everybody wanted more.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody, but greed is nothing new. I mean, I guess I'm not gonna say this is new. But what happened was, and I don't want to excuse the banks, but when I said that there were 76% of all the bad loans were on the books of government agencies, that means 24% was in the banks. Okay, but what dominated? It was the government that dominated. And how much do you hear about that when you hear what's published in the media? Very little.
Hey, Mr. Wallison, the name of his book is Hidden in Plain Sight: What Really Caused the World's Worst Financial Crisis and Why It Could Happen Again. I have to ask you something else. Is there anything uniquely American left in our financial system at all? Or is it the fact that all these businesses are so international? There's not like an American, a uniquely American interest when business decisions are made anymore.
Well, those are for the very big companies. I think you're probably correct. They're international companies. Their boards of directors are made up of people from all over the world, and in a way, that's not bad. But most of the businesses in the United States, by a wide margin, are made up of people who are living in the United States and are Americans, and those are actually the ones that do most of the employment. And so we should make sure that we create a stable economic environment for those companies to operate, and we haven't, and we are not. And so we can expect that we're going to have a very slow growth period into the future, I'm afraid, because we have put into place regulatory provisions after the 2008 financial crisis that were intended to control the financial institutions in this country. And that has, I'm afraid, caused us very slow growth period. Correct. Because they're afraid to take risks now.
Right. They don't want to lend money to entrepreneurs and businesses and everything else.
Yep. Right. That's right. And if the way our economy grows is when new businesses are able to start. And if you have a really good idea, the United States is a place where you can usually get a business going. And so the Googles were never heard of 15 years ago, and the rest of them. These are all developments that came because someone had a really good idea and got the financing for it. And if we make it tough for people to get financing, we are going to have fewer of these business formations. In fact, business formations right now are the lowest that they've been in 35 years. This is not a good situation.
No, go ahead. And
I was just going to say it's because of so much government regulation that was put in because the government blamed the private sector. And so after blaming the private sector, what do? You regulate them even more stringently than you did in the past.
Right, you really put the screws to them. Why? Because you can. Sure. Because of the G, they can do whatever you want, and it doesn't mean, I just want to point out, it doesn't mean, and I think you'll appreciate this, doesn't mean you can't get money. You just have to be more creative, and you just have to find it from private. It's just a different world today, and even 15 years ago, it's a different world than it was 30 years ago, where you could literally walk into your bank and on a handshake get a loan. Those days went down, went by the boards. And then even back in the day when Google started, then you could get money. So it's going from honest and trustworthiness, your local banker, to we got to be a little bit more, buttoned up, to now you can't even get any dough. And I always say the people like that bank, like I live in somewhat of a decent area, I say, the banks and the money lending to people the money that don't need the money.
Well,
you know what I mean? I mean, you got 10 mil. You don't need to. It cracks me up. They're happy to give you a loan. Yeah, but I don't need the money. But I'm happy to give you the loan. But we don't need the money. The guy that needs the money. Sorry, pal. It's very. It's kind of screwed up. But Peter Wallison, Hidden in Plain Sight: What Really Caused the World's Worst Financial Crisis and Why It Could Happen Again. AEI.